Hello. I feel like a wonderful sense of catharsis can come from reading fiction that's very heartbreaking, but also very well written. And it can also be strangely consoling knowing that others might have experienced a similar kind of pain that we might have felt at some point in our lives, and that an injustice has been memorialized in the text in this way. And I've been thinking about this because recently the Booker Prize invited me to write an article for their website about 10 great tearjerkers from the Booker Library of novels that have won or been listed for the prize in the past. And this was a big challenge because so many Booker books are seriously sad. And by that, I mean they are often quite about serious subject matter of widespread conflict or social inequity or devastating personal loss, but also have naturally a very melancholy tone to them, but many of them also have a great sense of the tragic comic to them, that there can be lightness found in even the darkest situations. So I had a real think about this and selected 10 books which really tugged on my heartstrings and got to me emotionally. So I want to discuss all of these titles that I've picked, but I'd love to know if you agree with my choices, if you disagree with my choices, or if you have alternative suggestions of Booker books that you have found to be really heartbreaking. I'm going to start with the oldest books and then move to more recent books, so hopefully you'll discover something that you might not have read before. And first, there is Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont by Elizabeth Taylor, and this was shortlisted for the prize in 1971, and it follows the titular heroine at the center of the story, Mrs. Palfrey, as she moves into a London hotel after her husband has died. And this hotel partly functions as a residence for older individuals who are kind of in an in-between stage of not being able to live entirely independently, but also aren't ready for a nursing home. And there's a really strong fear that in our old age we might experience some kind of loneliness, and so many people later in their lives experience this devastating sense of solitude, and that is what Mrs. Palfrey is going through, living in this accommodation with people that she wouldn't necessarily choose to live alongside, and they have a kind of friendship that grows over time, but really a lot of these people are so involved with trying to fill the time of their days, and Mrs. Palfrey becomes very fearful of each day, especially later in the day, when it becomes entirely empty, and there's just this resounding sense of silence. And so there's a really somber tone to this book, but it's also handled with a great lightness of touch, in that she really gets at the absurdities, at how some of these residents try to fill their time and some of their interactions with each other. But also Mrs. Palfrey meets, coincidentally, a younger man who she forms a kind of friendship with, and they also engage with each other in a mutual lie, which is really fun to follow. But this really gets at this the terrors of loneliness that might come with old age, and portraying that in such a meaningful and poignant way. Naturally, a lot of people confuse the novelist Elizabeth Taylor with the more famous actress, but Elizabeth Taylor was a great English writer who wrote around a dozen novels and deserves to be better known. Schindler's Ark by Thomas Keneally. This won the Booker Prize in 1982. When it was first published in the United States and in some other territories, it went under the title Schindler's List, and of course many people may be more familiar with Steven Spielberg's famous film version of the book, but it is so well worth reading this novel as well, which centers around the story of Oskar Schindler, who was a member of the Nazi Party and who became an unlikely hero during the war, in that he saved the lives of hundreds and hundreds of Jewish individuals and smuggled them out of the country and got them to safety. So it's following that harrowing journey and exploring his complex character. But the novel brings in so much factual research and in real life individuals who perished from or survived concentration camps during this time, but also a number of different Nazi Party members. But also he fictionally fills in scenes where there are sort of gaps in the histories. So it's a kind of hybrid book, and it's so creatively done and so powerful in how it brings this period to life. Of course, it is devastatingly tragic to read about, but also so heartwarming to know that someone is able to maintain their humanity in circumstances which are so desperate and terrifying. Reading Turgenev by William Trevor, this was shortlisted for the prize in 1991, and it was published in this book alongside another short novel, and the book is called Two Lives. But Reading Turgenev is about an Irish country girl named Mary Dallin who grows up on a farm with her family. She's in her early 20s, and she wants to move to the town, and the only method she sees for doing this is a relatively well-off merchant from that town who starts to court her, and so they get married, but she soon finds that married life comes with its own trappings and restrictions, and but she re-encounters a frail cousin of hers who has a passion for Russian literature, which he reads aloud to her, and this inspires in her a secret alternative life. And so I think many of us, when we're living in difficult circumstances, we find that the imaginative power of reading fiction and literature can open up our world in ways that we aren't physically able to go to in our real lives. And this captures that so well. It is deeply tragic. It's a tragic love story, and what occurs in her life, and it's so inventive how the narrative moves back and forward between short sections of a more present time and then longer sections which delve into the past and her circumstances, and living alongside her terrifying and horrible sisters-in-law that's so well captured in this book. But it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. Another novel with a tragic love story at its center is Maps for Lost Lovers by Nadeem Aslam. And this story is about an English community that's largely made up of Pakistani individuals and families, and there's a couple at the center of the book, but they are absent, which for reasons which become terrifyingly clear over the course of the story and following a number of people in this community. And it's about the real pressures that so many people in this town feel, both from outside their community of racism that they experience, but also inside the community of certain people that practice a very strict Orthodox form of Islam, and how this restricts the lives of some of the people in the community. But there's a wonderful respect that's given to each individual that's portrayed in this novel, how it shows all of their different points of view in a very sympathetic or empathetic way. And it is also beautifully written. The language that's used in this, I think, is just absolutely gorgeous. I know some people feel like it's a bit too florid, but for me, it is so effective and such a wonderful story. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. At first, this seems to be quite a gentle and simple story about a love triangle in an English boarding school. But then we understand that there is another purpose behind the lives of these characters, and it is so devastating and terrifying, following the consequences of this discovery. And there are many more surprises and discoveries rather than this one big reveal that are found along the way. And following a character called Kathy's recollections of this and the impact of this discovery that they make is just so heartbreaking. It follows how their lives are steered by jealousy and betrayal and pride, and the novel is a really unique blend of science fiction in that it's set in an alternate reality in the 1990s, but it's also a really great romance. And of course, Ishiguro writes about emotional subject matter in such a delicate and powerful way. I could easily have picked any of his books for this list. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I couldn't make a list about this subject without including this novel, could I? There's a reason why there have been so many video responses to this book of people weeping while holding up this great big book, because the way it follows in such a sustained and lengthy way the abuse and pain and anguish that its central character of Jude goes through over a long period of time will completely break you. It's undeniable. But of course, there are many people who have very strong feelings one way or the other about this book. You might react with massive amount of anger, or you might be emotionally devastated. And I think that's one of the most extraordinary things about this book. But also, Yanagihara has a way of drawing you into the lives of her characters that you want to know what is going to happen next, and you want to follow them for many hundreds of pages. And I think one of the strongest aspects of this story that people relate to and connect to so much is the way that Jude hides his condition and his past from the people in his life that he loves the most and that are apparently the closest to him, but he conceals these things about it. And I think so many of us have this with a lot of the people in our lives that we feel like we should be able to confess anything to them, but really there are certain things we conceal and hide. And the longer these relationships go on with partners or friends or family members, the harder it is to confess and reveal these secret aspects of ourselves. And I think it provides a touchstone in this way, and it's so powerfully done. And I think it's going to remain a much loved and much discussed novel. Sabrina by Nick Drnaso. This is the only graphic novel that's ever been listed for the Booker, and I think it's especially powerful in its graphic representation of its story alongside its text and the storyline itself. So Sabrina, the central character, she has gone missing, and her sister and her boyfriend are trying to discover what happened to her. And when that is revealed, it is truly shocking, but it is also so moving following them as they deal with the consequences of this knowledge and as they move throughout their lives. There are so many passages in this of people trying to have these awkward conversations talking about emotional subject matter and the very difficult way of kind of tiptoeing around each other, but how that's represented in the images as well. There's a lot of blank rooms and a lot of muted expressions on the faces of the characters, and I feel like this adds to this sense of emotional barrenness in the story and not being able to talk about subject matters concerning grief, but also larger issues to do with America and the state of the country and conflicts that are going on, which are so evident and so widespread, but which people feel it's really difficult to discuss in one-to-one conversations. 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world by Elif Shafak. It's speculated by scientists that the brain remains active for a number of minutes after the heart stops. And so that is what Shafak explores in this novel, following a character who has just died and been thrown into a dumpster, and how she is recalling the memories of her experiences and her life over this very compressed amount of time. And there's a special tragedy to it, knowing that her consciousness is going to expire very soon, and her life itself has a very tragic arch to it, that she grew up in the countryside with a very strict and conservative father, that she moved to the city and became a prostitute, and following her very difficult life, but also her afterlife, and a number of friends of hers who are also marginalized individuals but want to pay respect to Layla's life, and so following how they go about doing this, of marking her life in this graveyard for people that are kind of thrown away by the state. It's so beautiful as like a tribute to friendship in this way, but it's also devastating following all their individual stories and the trials and tribulations that they go through. The Pear Field by Nana Ekvtimishvili. This is a story about a residential school for intellectually disabled children in the country of Georgia. And the management of this school is very corrupt. They steal a lot of the money that is meant to be for the students, and the students, as a result, live under very difficult circumstances. There's a lot of abuse and depravity and fighting amongst the students, and it follows a central character of a young woman who has gone through this schooling system and endured a lot of abuse herself, but she's determined to save a young vulnerable boy at the school and get him out of these circumstances and move out of the school herself, and also get her revenge. So it's following this very harrowing story, but it's so beautifully written, and there's a lot of powerful symbolism in the novel, like with the title itself, The Pear Field, which is a field, fruit fields outside of the school, which has fruit which looks very tempting, but when you get up to it, you see that the fruit is rotted from the inside. And so this is kind of a metaphor for this schooling system, which is purportedly to help the students, but is really taking advantage of them. So the way it's looking at these larger social issues as well as the personal lives of these characters is just excellently done. And finally, there is Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, and this novel did really actually make me weep as I was reading it. It just got to me, and I think a lot of people who have experienced bullying and difficulty at school will know the pain that these characters experience, because it follows a boy who's cruelly nicknamed Eyes because he has a lazy eye, and the boys at the school ruthlessly bully him, but he strikes up a kind of friendship with another girl who is also bullied by the schoolgirls around her, and the relationship that they form is very delicate and beautiful, but also it's so interesting how these two children have very different perspectives on the abuse that they receive and the meaning of it and the repercussions of it. And so how they translate and deal with this pain in their lives, it's so creative how this novel explores that. But yeah, it really got me. So those are my choices, all absolutely heartbreaking books. I'll put a link in the description below to the article I wrote if you want to read more of my thoughts about these books and the article itself. But I'd love to know what you think about any of these books, if you have read them or if you're interested in reading any of them now, or do you have alternative choices of Booker books that you think are real tearjerkers. There are so many others that I could have chosen and mentioned. Here's a few others of like Shuggy Bane, of course, and Milkman. And there are books with certain scenes in them that I think are absolutely devastating, like an early scene in Wolf Hall following the abuse that Thomas Cromwell receives and the position this puts him in life as that really broke me. So let me know what you think in the comments below. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and have a box of tissues ready. And I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.